Hey there, and welcome to another episode of the Supermarketers Podcast, where we focus on how AI is impacting content. And today we have Ross Hudgens, who is the founder and CEO of Siege Media. Ross, what's up?
Not much. Good to see you. Not just on the
Hey.
court,
Nice to
on
see
the
you.
video.
Yeah, Ross. Yeah, first I'll give you your flowers. You are like you're a Warriors fan. So you're like a Draymond Green. You are a presence on the defensive end, and you're a physical body, and you might be undersized, but you are becoming quite the baller.
Well, I appreciate it.
Yeah.
You lead the league in steals,
Yeah.
so I don't know what's your equivalent on defense,
Yeah.
but
All right. Mind you, for context, this is all at the YMCA at 6 a.m.
yeah.
Uh, but you are also a thought leader at the forefront of AI, content generative engine optimization, answer engine optimization. So I kind of wanted to start there with your study of like 12,000 URLs, how the state of AI is changing. It's kind of like that. Nobody has the set answer. There is no set answer. Things are changing. Google just launched Gemini 3 this week. But what are you seeing that people are maybe getting wrong, or where do you see the puck going and the conversations that like people might not be understanding that you're understanding from your perspective of data?
Definitely a lot of people paralyzed or assuming ChatGPT is going to be the thing. I think it's starting to soften a little bit of less of those people thinking that, but that was a huge narrative first half of the year where it's like we shouldn't even do SEO, we should just do this AI thing, and we saw a lot of that, but in our data we saw two things. One, ChatGPT traffic's flattening. Second, Google is still actually growing. And I think that's because largely we do have a mix of, it's worth noting, our clients are large in consumer and B2B. And of course, consumer just generally has more visits on average. So it probably slightly dilutes it. I think more B2B people are flat to down on average. But pipeline, from most of the people I talk to, is still potentially up. It's not universally up, but it can be still growing from what we're seeing. So that's still optimistic about the future of search, I think, is more of that. But what kind of content we do is seemingly shifting from pure answer focused top funnel to transactional medium bottom funnel, or yeah, middle bottom funnel as well.
Yeah, so that's one thing that I did want to talk to you about, where you had an interesting slide. So this is like the overall traffic by content type, right? So there's the guides and playbooks were getting the most traffic. And I think you also had a subsequent slide in terms of like the change year over year or period over period. Comparison slides were doing well. But the stuff that wasn't doing well is stuff that can be summarized or where there is no information gain or proprietary insights or perspectives. But I'd love to hear your perspective and you can elaborate on that.
Yeah, that's what I saw in our data, and that's correct. So we essentially took a sample of lots of different categories in our set of around 200 websites that we looked at and grouped them by URL slug. So extrapolating out certain types that seemingly held up, some that didn't. The transactional ones, things like pricing, costs, comparisons, even trends held up decently well. I think that's a lot of the AI conversation that is getting people paying attention pretty well to that. But exactly to your point, the biggest loss was a lot of like how to's, what is content, things that you could potentially get a single snippet from sometimes and get enough and not need to view the full website.
Yeah. So what is the actionable takeaway or the so what? So focus on pricing pages, focus on comparison pages, the interactive stuff like a template or calculator, but we're basically going more bottom of funnel content.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So more bottom funnel. We saw a lift in case studies too. I don't know. It was just like an economic downturn thing, but seemingly just engagement was up to case studies. So maybe LLMs are referencing that more often, but that is our action item for clients for sure, is embrace the bottom funnel. If you're doing top funnel or middle funnel, it better be a complex top funnel, like multimodal. There's images, maybe video. You're building something that you can't summarize, or maybe it's complex enough. And normally the data and like Ahrefs will show that from click-through rate curves being still holding up. Although we can't, like, it's going to keep getting cut down for sure.
So at Siege Media, one of your offerings is content. So you're offering content for enterprise B2B brands, enterprise B2C brands. However, mark that with like pure AI content is underperforming. At least that's what your data was saying. So
Yeah.
can you explain what your approach is to incorporating AI and where in the workflow you're actually like seeing AI be effective?
Yeah, so we have a head of automation now, and he is helping with things like keyword research, content refreshes. We do have a workflow that suggests where you can take value additive data, information gain data, and then have AI suggest where that can be added on your current content. And then that can drive more freshness on average. We call that the data flywheel for ourselves. We do give the team open floor to use it as a sparring partner on certain articles. So if they do want to actually feel like this area is commoditized, I'd rather have AI actually write this paragraph or two, that's completely fine as long as it enables them to spend their time more fruitfully in other places. So it's a lot of the edge. It's the ideation, research, brainstorming. I think it's allowing us to get much better sample size of topics we could do. Like previously, we could do like 100 topics in the time we had from clients. And now we could potentially consider like 400. And they're more on target because you start with a new client in B2B who's technical. It's hard to like really know a super technical brand very well. And AI is pretty good at being a little bit better than someone who started one weekend for a new client in terms of like precision on topic. It's not perfect still, but it is supercharged the path a little, at least for us.
For sure.
Yeah.
I want to dig into your head of automations, or more specifically, identifying the keywords. So keyword research, whereas now it's changed, right? And I'm using LLM visibility trackers, and you need to upload a set of prompts. But the challenge, of course, is like, how do you actually come up with those prompts? Do you use like your keyword research and then extrapolate out into a question? Or do you just have an AI or an LLM based on the ICP come up with the questions? Can you walk me through your process of what you're doing for keyword research and then how you're actually tracking that LLM visibility?
Yeah, I mean, we there's a lot of good trackers. We're using Peak currently. Profound's good as well, but Peak is our current choice. And one way we've thought about prioritization is you take, so if you're most of your listeners are in B2B, like feature solution pages, and you would map like what is the best project management software, or maybe it's what is the best project management software for family offices. I don't know, something like that. And then you create a version of that, how people would search your prompt, input it in a Peak. It returns a list of source URLs. And then within those source URLs, there's often themes. So it's like you may find in a unique way, maybe it's like a comparison article of like certain types of family office project management things. Maybe they call it something else. So that may pop up in a way that is not clear in other industries. And that may help us prioritize that in our content roadmap. Prompt volumes do exist. They're not seemingly very accurate, but we're liking that for brainstorming on the LLM side in particular, is using the most source URLs within the prompts that matter to our bottom funnel transactional pages. And then considering that against search data too, if that makes sense.
That does, yeah.
Yeah.
And then you're just tracking, of course, you can't catch the entire universe of prompts, but you're just taking like your small section of this. And are you using it almost as a directional guide? Like we are increasing visibility based on what we're identifying as important.
Yes, exactly. So it's kind of what is your baseline for visibility and then aiming to improve that over time. I do think that's the most instructive because, yeah, even ChatGPT traffic is flattening. And there's some people that are saying that's just how they're sourcing URLs. Maybe they're becoming Google and sourcing URLs less, but also maybe their traffic is, their growth is slowing down a little bit, and maybe a little of both. But overall visibility, also visibility on AI mode, I think is critical because it feels like Gemini is eventually going to become the default. So we're using, that's one of our default LLMs to track within Peak as well, is making sure AI mode, like that seems like actually the most important one to track, honestly, because
Right.
if it becomes default, that's a problem if you haven't been
Yeah,
potentially.
for sure.
Yeah.
One of the things I wanted to ask you about was this notion of data journalism. So, touching on what you're talking about earlier, like the types of content that are defensible that will continue to see traction. And so it touches on thought leadership, information gain, or proprietary data. But what do you think makes this data journalism a defensible moat for B2B brands?
Yeah, it's just in a world where you can press a button and hypothetically create content that's solid, you need to have an answer as to what we're doing uniquely us. And data is an answer to that. Of course, if everyone starts doing data and it's the same kind of study, that maybe its own conversation. I am seeing a little bit more of that, which is its own like probably next trend to discuss, but it's a great starting point. When we see the LLM data, the studies from places like AirOps that say is getting referenced more often in LLMs, and of course, that's going to generate more organic links, which will help with visibility. It also allows for justified freshness. So we talked about that data flywheel update process. If you do data study every quarter on trends in your industry, you can then update all your other content with that new data. Now you have a new date, and LLMs love new content. It's a nice cycle that seemingly can perpetuate and be fruitful.
Yeah. Now, is there like a threshold of N of whatever to make it seem like enough? Because, for example, a few months ago, there was this kind of viral study that 95% of enterprise AI studies fail. But if you look at the study that was, or AI implementations, AI pilots, and that was based on,
Oh,
I think, 500 executives. And I think it came from MIT. But if you look at it, it's really not that large of a sample size, nor if you're like, what is an AI pilot? What's the definition of that, or what is it, failure or success? But yeah, how are you establishing the criteria of it? Because I'm wondering if it's defensible, sure, but how do you actually make that investment, the time frame, the cost, the people?
yeah, good question. Tools, we'll use multiple different platforms for collecting data. So SurveyMonkey, Sentiment, YouGov are all platforms. And within those, I know SurveyMonkey in particular does have a sample size calculator. So say, I don't know that study who they were sampling, but let's say they were sampling CMOs. It's not unreasonable. Like 500 sounds statistically significant, unfortunately. There's definitely, yeah, it could swing pretty dramatically just because it is smaller, but there's only so many CMOs. Well, if you were interviewing maybe like HR professionals, it may be a little larger because it's a bigger pool, but that's part of the consideration set for sure. It's like, what is the sample size to make that valuable? And of course, there's cost considerations. Like talking to CMOs is quite expensive. So you often do want to get to that at least bare minimum, but ideally a little above it level of like statistical significance. Otherwise, it's going to be really expensive. But
Yeah.
most surveys will be like 3 to 6K across industries, honestly.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I do remember you did a survey with Winter,
Yeah.
and it was executives, and it was interesting insights. So that's something that, yeah,
Yeah. We do
it's
that
like
every
my
year. We're working on that now, actually.
great,
Yeah. Yeah.
awesome. So one of the things that you shared in your presentation is this idea that social is the new open web, that it is imperative almost for these brands because it's not necessarily even the backlinks, but more so the visibility, the mentions, and in these open communities called Reddit, YouTube, LinkedIn. Uh,
Yeah.
so can you explain what the strategy is if you are a resource strapped team? And like you need to balance all these priorities, all these initiatives. How important is it? What's the right approach? And how do you actually tactically execute on that?
Yeah, good question. So the if you're in B2B particular, LinkedIn is probably your channel in particular. Reddit could have some value as well, but probably LinkedIn. And what I saw and called out in that presentation is that LinkedIn overall visibility on search is eking up. And my bet or note in that presentation, who knows if I end up being right or not, is that it will follow a similar path to what Reddit is now in terms of just pretty strong visibility across all searches. Because it makes sense that if the open web is having some attrition, where's new content going to come from? It's going to come from somewhere where people are publishing. If LinkedIn's the only place that people are like reliably doing that at scale in an authentic fashion, that seems reasonable they would pull from that. So for a smaller company with limited resources, I mean, if you feel comfortable putting yourself out there from a personal brand standpoint, that may be worth investing in and maybe just considering the secondary value you're building in doing that. It's not just the single post, but you could build towards other things. I don't know. It's yet at the point where I'm like thinking about keywords when I'm writing a LinkedIn post, but it's still not, it doesn't hurt. I'm definitely seeing when I post on LinkedIn, it's less of an immediate burst, and there's like a long tail of liking and commenting. And some of that may be search, honestly. So I think that's worth considering. If you're not a natural writer or doing video clips or podcasts, there are tools out there you can do. Obviously, everyone's using AI. I don't necessarily recommend that perfectly. You could do things like upload videos like this. And I think sometimes it can be helpful. Give it a deck you created, give it a video. And if you're a natural like talker, it may be good at like extrapolating interesting things out. I've heard of white label firms. They become even more popular where they'll interview you, create that transparently. I even tested that for a little bit. I no longer do it. I don't think it was a bad process. It just wasn't, we didn't make sense to move forward with. But yeah, those are just some of the things that I'd consider. Obviously, AI is scrappy and probably the best path for a test for newer thought leaders.
Yeah. I do remember Rand Fishkin from SparkToro mentioned, and he was doing it on his own name, that Rand Fishkin, CEO, founder of SparkToro, whatever. And then he had his line. And it is the point, the takeaway of that was it was more about repetition and also having that consistency over time, so that it was almost like inculcating the LLMs. And so it was on LinkedIn, it was on a speaker bio, it was on a byline. It was always the same. So maybe that's one way to do it too.
I completely agree. That's a common thing of own places. Are you defining your positioning correctly on those? I think that's probably one of the lowest hanging fruits for LLM influence, seemingly.
Yeah. And now let's talk about now, if you are considering you have limited resources too, you don't always have to create net new content, right? Like part of it from your conversation with Josh Spilker of AirOps is the value of a content refresh. What have you seen with the value of taking something that's done well, or maybe it's declining in terms of ranking or LLM visibility? How are you doing that? What have you seen? What's your strategy and approach on that?
Yeah. So one benefit of one of the things our director of automation built was this analysis tool that will look at the page one search results, compare it to the client's update date, and you can see that delta. So if I'm like 300 days older than the average search result date, I probably should update that. So that allowed us to know when to prioritize topics against the pipeline and sales they're generating for clients. And we'll leverage that automation. And or it's not even necessarily AI driven, although there may be an AI component to understand the many different blogs have dates in many different ways. That informs the updates. And then if we have new data from the data journalism process, we can do updates much faster than we had previously. So I do think generally having something that is quite good for that update is fruitful. I've seen manipulative updates be done, not very significant. And that's where my mind goes to with new data is like, you just authentically, if you add a decent amount of data points, like you've made enough change to that article to justify the date update. And then in turn, you get the benefit. But if you are just like moving sections around, I don't know, that just feels manipulative and I think at risk to performance. So we still do full refreshes, but we are throwing in that kind of faster cadence. Sometimes we're often recommending quarterly for some clients.
Okay.
Yeah.
So yeah, nearing 2026, an inflection point, so many inflection points with answer engine optimization and whatever. But how are you approaching your content strategy? Where are you seeing some over index in ROI in terms of like your marketing strategy or what you're doing with brands, in particular B2B brands now?
I mean, you're hitting a dead horse here, but the data journalism piece I think is still quite fruitful. I think it is risk free if you use it correctly. And version is not just to build a data study, but it's to use the data everywhere. It's to repurpose it. So if you have a data, like we did that trends report you mentioned seeing from us with winter, we have those data points on almost every single article on our website from just one study. So even if that costs you $10,000 to get that data, and you only do that once a year, and that's probably worthwhile to a content marketing strategy. So that's going quite far, I think. And then you can drive update value. And of course, bottom funnel comparison articles versus articles, they're just still performing quite well for clients. And I expect they will for a good period of time. Those are the two that scream at me from your question.
Nice. So I'd like to close out just to learn more about how you personally, or you've mentioned your head of automation a couple of times, some really cool use cases, but how are you as a marketer using AI and finding value in it?
Yeah, our head of automation for sure is the one we're leaning into. We're building our own tools and analysis. Personally, I'm probably like most people and continually prompting ChatGPT or now Gemini Pro with lots of different questions in terms of my workflow. But thinking constantly about how we can improve our own workflow and process and building that tool set is something I think everyone's got to do. That maybe might not be the most helpful note of all time, but thinking about all those edge areas that we waste time and using it accordingly with AI is how we're doing it.
Yeah. I would say the way you were discussing that winter case study is just like chunking it up into all the different angles that you could take from it and then just upload it into your knowledge base. And then, yeah, it's like that is just the resource that we'll keep on giving for the next year until you get the refreshed, updated data. That sounds super valuable.
Agreed.
Ross, thanks so much. I really appreciate the insights and the expertise that you shared. What's the best place to find you online?
To stay on theme, LinkedIn.
All right.
Yeah. Just
Ross
fine. Yeah,
Hudgens
Ross
on
Hudgens.
LinkedIn.
Yeah, sorry, Ross. I'm on X as well. And yeah, we have data studies on our Learn section. If you look at our drop down on Siege Media, we're practicing what we're preaching. Hopefully, some of your listeners will find those valuable too.
Fantastic. Ross, thanks so much.
Yeah, thanks for having me.